Welcome to the Data Product Management in Action podcast, created and executive produced by me, Scott Hurlman, and brought to you by Soda, your best friend in data quality and contracts tooling. We created this podcast to serve as a place for actual practitioners bringing product management practices to data, whether that is to AI and ML, data products, platforms, or everything else in data, right? And it's to dig into the nitty-gritty of product management in data, but in fun and dynamic conversations. It's not just lift and shift from software product management. We have a great set of hosts for you that are also practitioners, so they can really get into those specifics and dive deep and get you the information you want to know rather than just high level, here is what a data product is. This is about cutting through the noise of data product management to drive towards actionable insights, hence the actual podcast name, Data Product Management in Action. So sit back and enjoy another awesome conversation.
Hey everyone, it is Toland here with the Data Product Management in Action podcast, and I am really excited to be joined with Chandan Gadodia. He is our guest today. Chandan, thank you so much for joining us. How about take a few moments and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Michael. Very happy to be here. I saw this opportunity about the podcast. I was quite intrigued that people are into the data product management stream. It's getting, big and big. I started as a data engineer back in the day, about 11 years back. And then eventually I started going into the product management. And very recently I started working with data product management because very, very close to data. And then it evolved to managing more data assets, more data sets, data products. And that this is where my organization thought of putting up something which is more specific to data products. So I'm based out of Netherlands, and I've worked in UK in the past. I've worked in India in the past, and that's my journey in a very, very short note here.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think one of the things that we had talked about in sort of our pre-chat was you were really interested in this big boundary that exists between sort of data product managers, functional product managers, and technical product managers, and that you really need to understand how those boundaries. And I'm curious if you could expand more for our audience on what your thoughts are.
If you think about the old days, you would all usually have IT product management and then maybe just a functional manager or functional product manager. With data taking a central role, you really need somebody who can understand where the data comes from, how it is formed, what are the data standards, the quality of it. And that is where you need a data product management layer. Now, the data product manager takes care of the quality of the data pipelines, the execution of the pipelines, standards, refreshes, and all these things. But whereas the IT product manager would then take this data product, the data as a product, that I would like to call it, then, let's say, plug it with the application or the service or the product that is intended to use this data as a service or data as a product, whatever. So that's where I usually draw boundaries. So the data product manager just takes care of the data pipelines, quality standards. The ID would take care of people on people cost, the infrastructure setup, the communication, the functional owner in terms of delivery, etc. And the product owner basically is all the whole basic thing where they do the roadmap for delivery, functional, let's say, expertise and functional training of it, driving the value out of the product at the end of the day. So with this tier bifurcation, you don't, overstep each other. And that's how I define it.
Got it. Yeah. And I really appreciate sort of those finer boundaries where you're really just focusing on the end result of that data product. And so what does it take to build it? I'm really fascinated by this because I don't think anyone has articulated, at least from what I've talked with folks, something quite as clear. And I appreciate that because I think folks kind of feel as though data product managers can very quickly meld into that sort of technical or IT product manager that you're describing, particularly because sometimes the data product manager and data engineering team understand also the infrastructure needs they're going to need. And I think like there's this really interesting pull and play between like your technical product managers who really, I think, own platform-centric work. Like, how do I quickly, for my data teams, help them stand up the infrastructure that they need, using platform services and self-service tools that allow those folks to just quickly run and then focus on what they're best at, which is that entire data pipeline. I'm curious then we talk a lot on this podcast around like, what is data as a product versus a data product? Everyone seems to be defining it a little bit differently. And I feel like this industry just hasn't coalesced around clear terms. And so I think part of our podcast is just to sort of expose that like we're all a little creating this kind of a role over the past several years in Sando. And I'm curious, when folks say data as a product versus a data product, what's your perspective on that dichotomy?
We in the organization itself have a big argument, let's say heated discussion about what data product and data as a product would mean and where exactly we would sit. And then I think the conclusion was data product. At first, we define what data product is and data as a product is. And we say anything which is, let's say, a reporting or a report itself, or anything which is an application or a simulation tool, which is an end product that a user would use, is data product. And data as a product is basically nothing but, let's say, a fuel or engine that powers a data product. For example, a data set or a view, or it could be a accumulation of views like a data model together. So all these things are data as a product, which powers the data. Now, data as a product is something that is managed by the data product manager, and the data product is something that's managed by the technical product manager, because it might entail other extensions to it, right? So you could have a UI, you could have, you could have machine learning and other things that could be there. It could cross-reference to other, let's say, ID landscape, right? From engineering to otherwise. And hence we just, let's say, had two streams. We know it's easy to melt, but I think it was an easier approach to say that you want to focus more and more on data. We say data is the new oil and other things. So I think it was quite important to have that demarcation and say that, okay, we're going to modularize this further. And we have specialists who understand data, and then call them data as a product manager kind of thing. So.
Yeah. And I think the way I think a lot of folks are thinking through data as a product is like you're a pro of using product level thinking on data and data work, and like, how do I structure my data usable? And I think that's one of the things that I'm always thinking about is when I'm taking on the role, because I'm a consultant, and so I'll do like functional product management, technical product management, data product management. I probably don't do any one of those super well sometimes, because it's a lot of switch tasking, but it gives me a nice well-rounded view of product management to have conversations like this, I guess. But one of the things I think about is who's the end user of the data product, and what question do I hope that this product that I'm working on answers for that user, or what insights does it allow for that user to glean, or what action does it help them make? I'm interested in, because that's such a collaborative effort. How do you find that data product managers collaborate effectively across different functional areas and technical teams, whether it's sales, finance, operations, marketing? I'm curious from your perspective, like, what are good tactics and tips to collaborate effectively and understand for who are you building and who's going to be the end consumer of this data?
Because, the data is such an important asset to any organization. Analyze and take critical decisions. And if this is not done correct, it could basically end up in a disaster where you take incorrect decisions. So it's very important to collaborate, for example, with your functional teams to understand what they did, what are they looking for, and how you could help them achieve that in their journey. So I would probably like to learn a bit more working with one of my functional partners to understand that what are they trying. Is it a commercial planning? Is it a trade investment? Is it, is it some kind of promotion that we're going to run? And we understand that what is the life cycle of that particular thing. So to understand the business is something that is really important and how that translates into, let's say, the system or the flow. Because then you make more sense out of the data. Then you understand that what could be a black hole, or let's say even a gap in the data where you might see, let's say, empty values coming in, which would make no sense for the end consumer. And you could flag them at times. So very important to learn about the domain to understand that what it delivers as a value, and understand where it could basically fail the product, even if, technically, let's say we put quality and we say this cannot be null, this can't be this, etc. But it might still end up resulting in certain garbage value where you might have, let's say, NX coming in, which are, let's say, not applicables, but it might be like null for the end user because it doesn't deliver any value. So yeah, I think that's where you see data quality takes an important seat, which is also part of the TPM to kind of drive and execute. And the technical product manager basically is where most of the collaboration happens, right? So because they are the ones who would take this information, the data as a product, and then plug in with the, let's say, the app. In some cases, it could basically means just a report and it could be a simpler thing, but in a lot of cases, these are more like an application service. It could be a portal, a UI, or a simulation based on a machine learning algorithm. So you then also collaborate with them to understand that what they would like, technical product managers make sure that it runs correctly. So it's more of a technical handshake with them versus a functional handshake with the, and then you make sure that everything falls in line.
Yeah, and I want to dig in a little bit further. You highlighted the point of learning what your functional partners are doing and like what's the process they're trying to build out. I think that's really important, particularly as I've worked with a lot of organizations. Folks, I think, who are not really data fluent tend to get terrified of how big their data infrastructure seems. And partly, I think that is also because they don't understand the context of like a data domain. For instance, if I've got a series of customer attributes, I should like really articulate and define by principles, what are the attributes related to that customer, as opposed to maybe what's an attribute about a customer, but is actually a separate domain, but it links to them. If I've got customers who I'm going to bucket into tiers, I might have what the attribute of a customer is with an identifier of what tier they're in. And then I've got a whole different structure of identifying what tiers actually mean. Do they confer benefits? Is benefits is a different domain? And if so, how do I codify that? You think like there is a lot of work to understand the flow of information that a business team is trying to get to your point, to really understand where are the domains and where should this data get really consolidated to. And I think actually that, in my opinion, in addition to understanding the end-to-end layer of building out a data, you also kind of have to understand where the domain begins. I'm curious, how do you help teams really identify and go through and understand, this is the limits of where our data is really going to focus. And if we have additional objects or different domains outside of it, we're going to need to figure out how to work within these constraints.
That's something that works out very different. In a data mesh concept, when we have domains and we have teams which basically takes care of individual domain, we do have data product managers assigned, let's say, to individual domains. So let's say, or you could also double hat sometimes to multiple domains. What it would mean is that, for example, if a sales domain would want to consume something from financials or from, let's say, marketing, it's like a cross-domain consumption. Now, what we do here in this case, that we contact the other or my counter DPM in that particular domain, because they are the experts and they understand what it would mean. So instead of me doing the heavy lifting there, I would contact them, share the requirements, put up a data contract and say that this is what we need, like across domain data sharing. They expose it through, let's say, Unity catalog or whatever. In the case we use Databricks, sometimes through files or whatever, and then that connection is made. So that get another data product coming from a different domain from my counterparts. The only thing is I still own data product from my domain space. So I would manage it for my, let's say, consumers, and they don't have to go to individual data product managers all the time. That's taken care of.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's really hard for folks to grasp and really to navigate. Because I think it depends on what the product is that you're building, who it's for, and if you're kind of the lead, then partnering with those other data domain product managers to really understand in the mesh space, or even like functional domains where you may not be building the data mesh. There might be someone who is working on a very specific thing, and they own within a data warehouse sort of like a series of tables around that domain, and just understanding where your limitations are, what you need to know versus what you. I think a lot of folks just take too much on sometimes rather than collaborating.
Maybe at an initial stage when you're building up something new, and then you might start with one or two domains, and I think the challenge is, where do you kind of start expanding and start adding more data product managers? And I think that's the key, because when you look at a corporate or a large enterprise, it becomes extremely difficult to have just spread across all the domains. And at the end of the day, it's not doable if there's only one person doing it across everything.
Yeah, 100% agree. Or even if you have a centralized team that are disconnected from the domain, which I have experienced many times in my career. There's like a centralized team that manages all data assets, but they're so disconnected from the functions that actually lead to the creation of the data, the generation, and they also don't understand who's the unique consumer, and it ends up causing, so like I've never been married to one model or another, but I do think there's some happy middle that a lot of corporations can find. But I don't think I found it yet. And I think it's situational. I think folks tend to think about frameworks too often rather than
we got it, the central ivory tower.
Oh yeah, the central ivory tower. Yeah. And you can't touch them. You can't touch them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a one shoe, one size fit all kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's usually prepared for failures. In because when you take a pilot, or when you take, your most important, let's say, regions to develop something, when you expand and go to different geographies, you start getting problems, or you might see issues when you onboard more and more data sets. And this is where it gets very difficult for them to cater the fast-changing business needs, right? Because the business would need what they need. And the moment they start delivering value, people, especially the consumers, start feeling disconnected from what the platform provides. And they lose trust. The trust is lost with the platform. It's a big challenge for the data team to kind of keep up with those kind of demands and make sure that there's a right amount of collaboration between business.
Yeah, I think the ability to move quickly is, or has been, and I think we're seeing with the data be so important to businesses' day-to-day functions, is they're starting to reimagine the data office and reimagine the product data. Because usually what happens in these ivory tower moments, as you described, teams will just go rogue. And they start building their own data infrastructure, and then you balloon your cloud budget or your data warehouse budget if you're still on-prem physical hardware that you're maintaining, because there's not oversight, and there's folks who don't trust it, and the business just needs to keep moving. And I think that's really important. And so I think that comes down to I think that the second big topic we talked about in our pre-chat was really around the role of data architecture and data quality. And I think that data architecture really is what drives the speed of decision making with data. And so I'm curious, as an organization and as you who moved from data engineering into data product management, what sort of decisions have you reflected on around data architecture and the creation of data assets within organizations that you've worked? And as you've moved into this more product-centric role, like, has your thinking evolved and changed from maybe when you started your?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's been a big learning curve. When you have reiterated a similar concept with multiple, let's say, models, multiple executions with different regions, geographies, these things evolve. And in terms of architecture, we've seen big tables, white tables, normalized, denormalized, and all sort of things. And then I think it's based on the need as to who is consuming it. If it is, let's say, a report, if it is for the leadership, if it is something which is more machine learning. So, there are different options for each of them. And I don't think that one architecture design do it. What we do is that we have certain blueprints that have been, let's say, predefined, or let's say pre-approved. And we know that if you really get certain architecture and you do these steps, so let's say if you're looking at data lake architecture, you could go from bronze, silver, gold, and you get your things done. If you're looking at something else, let's say you want to have data marts and stuff. So we have predefined few architectures, and we say you choose one of these, and then based on your use case, you're going to surely hit a decent success. Whereas if you're looking at something which is maybe absolutely different, we review it. We don't say no, but we of course have to review it and make sure that it takes all the security, it takes all the concerns that one organization may have. So if it takes a longer route, I mean, we can of course go, but it takes a longer route.
Yeah, I think it's really.
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just wrapping it up. So, but that's again from data perspective. Again, we'll be seeing a lot of involvement, or let's say evolution that's happening, especially on the AI and data side. And then the quality is something that's being pushed a lot, because if the quality is not good, the outcomes are really, really bad. So that's something that we are trying to integrate with the architecture and say that how do we integrate good quality our quality check within our architecture framework to make sure that it's a really usable thing for all these machine learning, Gen AI, and AI kind of spaces. Oh yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to sit down with a product manager at Anthropic, not with this podcast, but through like an internal sort of business meeting with one of my clients. And I asked them about this question around folks tend to struggle with data quality in a lot of big organizations, partly because of the ivory tower, partly because domain data experts are just focusing on delivering like for business functions as opposed to maintaining and making certain their data is great. And I asked the question around like, how does artificial intelligence, which relies on good quality data, how can I use artificial intelligence, and particularly with the rise of LLMs, to help me actually improve my data quality? Because look, I'm a layman. I've never taken an engineering course. I've built a JavaScript or a Java code for 3 weeks that ended up crashing my computer's memory. That's how great of an engineer I am. And so I'm curious, have you, since we talked about sort of artificial intelligence, are you exploring new and novel ways of using artificial intelligence to help you? And whether that's machine learning, AI, ML, or if it's like specifically LLMs, are you utilizing that to help you drive better data products in the production of those data products?
Absolutely. I mean, this is not something I would say a big bang, or it's already there, but we're definitely looking at opportunities. We've done some POCs and tested a few things where we're using machine learning and AI algorithms to generate missing values. So, for example, when we look at certain product, you do have the description, but we do not have the attributions about it. Or, of course, the reason that somebody at the source is not entering them correctly. So you might not have the color or the fragrance or the size of the product coming in correctly or not coming at all. And then we could probably have the AI look at the image of the product and generate it for us. Also, sometimes with the description being quite descriptive, it also generates it from them. And we see a good success ratio, where they're at 90% in a lot of cases. So that's helping us to improve our data quality as. So that's one thing that we've definitely tested, and I would not say we've implemented that yet, but that's on the roadmap.
Yeah, I've seen some really interesting use cases where they've integrated large language models into like a data catalog and really helped sort of like these functional business owners of data be able to use LLMs to like provide a little context about the data, context about maybe some of the abbreviations, and then build out their data catalog very quickly, and with all the descriptions of columns and tables. I was blown away. Now, granted, you still have to go and vet that out and do a lot to actually vet that all those generated descriptions, maybe tags and metadata about the data. But I actually think that's a huge value add, particularly for data governance and data quality teams that are more on the business side, who don't have that technical expertise and are working, because then they can refer back to the engineering team like, hey, here's what we've done. Does this seem to match sort of your expectation from the engineering side and the production? So, and I think the other thing that you really talked through is that I want to focus on is the source and how do you capture data? Because to me, once I understand what data I need on the consumer side, I've got to sort of back up all the way to the beginning and say, okay, well, how am I getting this data? And how have I built data quality directly into because I think a lot of folks don't think about the design of the capture of data, whether it's a free form, whether it is, some sort of API that's bringing in data or pulling it in. And I'm curious, like, how do you sort of think about mapping out that? And what are your thoughts on like really focusing on data quality right at the source of capture?
Absolutely. I mean, that's usually the problem. The source or the business process which generates data itself is flawed. And a lot of times is what we've seen. So we have a data quality issue at source. We have a data quality issue. Maybe when you're doing a pipeline and somebody, doesn't apply correct rule, which is usually fixable because, that's something that you can control. And then you have a data quality product or the application that you're using. Now, the end part, I'm going to come back later because that's more niche. Source is very tricky because, so you have ERPs, you have third-party aggregators, you have applications or forms where you can collect your data. So there are different various models where the data comes in, and then they all have different formats, they have different schemas, let's say, and forms, and then it's very difficult to kind of bring them together. And the person who's capturing those data cannot, or let's say, might not have the understanding as to where this is going to be used, or may not understand where all the places it could be used. And that's why they might miss certain, let's say, elements. So let's say I have a sales execution guy, goes to a store, clicks a picture, puts some input. He might skip to say that, yes, whether the product has a promotion or not. And therefore, at the end of the day, I cannot say that the promotions are running for a given product in the store. And, that's one of the examples. So the business process, if it forces him or her to kind of say that, yes, you have to do this. That's one thing that we've seen, that the business process is one hindrance where there's no checks and balances on entering, the data entry, that's where it starts to become a lot of pain for the consuming end.
Yeah.
In terms of implementing data quality, of course, we try to implement a lot of things, but it more or less goes back to the process as to how it is generated. And yes, there is some success to kind of fix them, but it's very difficult because it's a business process. It doesn't happen. It's a lot of change management.
Yeah,
that goes to get that right.
One of the things that I think companies tend to over-index on is that technology can solve all their problems. But a lot of problems, I think, in the data space are usually people and process. Hey, do you agree?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what we've seen.
Yeah. Because a lot of processes are just hodgepodge together, messy. Because especially if you've been with a business in startup days and you now are starting to like mature into sort of more a traditionalized business, what I have found is those companies are really struggling to mature because they don't want to lose that bustling startup energy, but they also then don't focus enough and they aren't slowing themselves down to make certain they can move fast eventually as they continue to mature and scale. I think I'm constantly telling my clients, why are you looking for a technical solution to solve the root cause of this issue, which is your business process? Why aren't you reevaluating your business process? We innovate all the time in software development. I think we need to take that same mindset and innovate on business process, particularly when it comes to data.
And most of the times when we go to a sprint or a scrum calls, the question is about technical debt.
It is.
Because people think that it's only technical debt that's piling up, but I think there's also data debt and process debts which we don't talk about. I think that's important to kind of address. At the first is that they exist and then they need to be.
I can't wait till I have time to sit down and think about. I've been working on this essay for I don't know, like 3 months in my head around the different types of debt that organizations accrue and why each one needs. We only really focus on technical debt, and there's process, there's operational, there's data, there's sometimes ethical debt that appears in an organization, which is sort of the culmination of not tackling any of it. So I think that's smart to highlight. I think then in this world where data is becoming more and more important to our businesses, we're starting to see finance organizations trying to wrestle with how they find value and fund the data products that are being built, which really power almost everything. I'm curious, how do you approach building a business case for data initiatives? Because I think that's so vital for product managers to be able to build the value proposition and take that to finance and get the funding.
That's quite a challenging one because coming from a more technical background, it's very difficult to understand that why one would not invest something that's so powerful and so promising. But nonetheless, learned the hard way that you have to still go and make sure that it ticks all the boxes for them to, give you some funding. What we usually do is we look at the strategic plan and the strategic roadmap of the company, and we say that, okay, this is what the company wants to achieve. These are the problems that we need to solve for them in order to achieve it or achieve it better. Sometimes you might have a solution, might not be, let's say, the most efficient one, and then you might have a better one, right? So that could be one case. The other thing that we see is there a cost of not doing certain things? So, for example, if you want to report, we have a green index right now, or a sustainability index that's become very popular with all the major companies in the world. And it's going to be more important. So if you're not able to have a sustainability report, and you'll not be able to have that on your, let's say, quarterly or yearly announcements. So what is the cost of not doing that? So we could categorize our initiative in one of these buckets and say, is it going to give your marketing competitiveness if you do something, let's say creating better products? If you're not being able to report on certain things, would give loss in investor value, whether it's aligned with your strategic goals. And then based on this, we go the next step and say that, you find your audience, you decide who's interested in one of these buckets, and then we basically build a case in that to say that this is gonna be. So this is your strategic, and then of course this could tangentially meet the other purposes as well. And it could say that, okay, if you do this of course solves the biggest let's say problem of reporting my CO2 emission or whatever. But it also helps me to develop better packaging products. It also helps me to develop and do things on research where I could, use better raw materials. So it could have tangential benefits, which can be tagged along with a key benefit. So that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I think that's been a consensus along a lot of people who are figuring out how to do this well, is figuring out how to tie your data initiatives and data work directly to the company key initiatives and strategies. Now, I don't know about you, but in most companies I've worked with, there's key corporate strategies, and then everyone has their little fiefdoms of like small little projects that sort of they claim tie into the strategies and then they don't. And I feel that is often the hardest hurdle to overcome. Is there's usually a lot of extra noise. And I think product is really positioned well to like say and cut through, frankly, the bullshit of a lot of operational teams coming with their own sort of thoughts and things that are going to tie in versus really being very strategic, very narrowly focused on just your company initiatives. Because if you get a smattering of focus, it's over, it's done for. And I see it happen so many times, and then a company strategy fail. I think then, given that this is a kind of a common problem, especially as organizations mature and grow, is how do you ensure that your data product development remains aligned and doesn't get tracked by all of these other competing priorities that say they're part of a company strategy and maybe are tangentially, but really there's like a singular focus from the executive team that then just kind of, people can't see my hands, but kind of tentacles out and kind of spreads too far away from the main silo that you're really trying to focus and build in. Like, how do you manage that and maintain your state?
I think for companies it's very important. I mean, whatever we build as a data product or data as a product, it has to deliver value at the end of the day. And then if it is delivering value even if the company changes strategy, it doesn't change its business. I mean, if I'm selling a product, I keep selling that product. There is a bread and butter aspect to it. The same happens with the data. For example, you need to report certain things. You cannot stop reporting your financials. Let's say if you're a listed company on a stock exchange, there are a few things that cannot go away. And you of course, you have them, sure. Now, the new initiatives are something that you fear to miss out. For example, that there was an e-commerce thing that was happening. It was quite expensive to be on an e-commerce platform. Nonetheless, most of the companies did invest in that. Now, what happens is when COVID hit the markets, the companies who were already experienced, were already positioned on Amazon and different websites, they were able to take a benefit out of that with the huge jump in the sales and the preparedness that experience over the past years. Now, that's one thing, right? It's not the best thing to say, but you always have a fear that if you're not competitive enough, you might miss that train. So I would always, advocate for making sure that you are technically competitive, because there's no company in the world that's not going to be technical in nature. Anything that's not technical, I think that's going to be just dissolved or, absorbed with time. You have to have that in mind, at the back of your mind. So I think the stakeholder mindship has to be there. Momentarily, if there's a big shift, you could have to pause, like for a very, very short duration better. For example, currently my organization having a big restructuring. So nothing stops as such. You could just, let's say, reprioritize, make sure the strategies are, to make sure that the structural changes take place, the impact is absorbed, and then everything is back to normal. So you might slow down a little bit at the end of the day, but you don't have to really stop unless what you're doing is extremely experimental or something just not being tied to a value proposition ratio. So,
yeah. And I think there's a lot of value in those really experimental processes, but I think you have to know experiments are supposed to be tiny and small, give early signal. And I think a lot of folks, specifically in businesses across, they misuse the word experiment.
It has to be a fail fast, right? So if you do it, it has to fail. Close it, you try something else. I mean, as long as it is incremental, it is, a decision is coming every, now and then, just say that, yeah, this pass, this failed. Are we going to go ahead? Are we going to have another round of it? And then you keep on doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's really important. I think then, once sort of you've taken all of our conversation in totality, at the end of the day, then you have to figure out, was I successful in this build? And I think this is the hardest point to measure. Like, I can say I built this thing and it delivered on the business requirements and the business teams are moving rapidly. But how do I actually measure the success of that? Like, what about the data product do I need to measure in order to tell the narrative to leadership that, hey, this is why we know this was successful?
I mean, if you think about it, right, for leadership or a company to be successful is to make more revenue at the end of the day. I mean, holistically, that's what company would be like. It's a non-organization that grow by a certain percentage every year. Now, there are various initiatives that are supported by data products. For example, you could have an initiative to increase your revenue or to, grow your market share in a given category. And that's what I would be aiming to capture, to say that if I'm going to give more promotions, more people are going to buy it, which means that my product could have expansion in the market share. And then you, of course, build or order a KPI indexing somehow to say that, okay, this is what it was before the product and this is what you have. So, I mean, these are some simple, I mean, I'm making it maybe oversimplistic in this case, because you might have multiple initiatives and they might, it might be difficult to kind of say that, the growth is because of initiative A, B, or C. So, that's a bit of a hustle. You always do some kind of assumptions and maybe look over a time period and say that you ran a promotion now versus you ran a TV commercial or something, and it's because of media or because of this. So it could be a combined effort as well. A lot of times there are simpler things where you could also take actions, right? So, for example, let's say you have sales executive or you have certain stores where you're selling, let's say Costco, BJ's, they all keep my product. And then I want to make sure that, I do get consistent growth in revenue. So I have products which could, measure my growth and my sell out day in and day out, which would mean that if they're not selling something as we would have expected, I could still maybe have a conversation with them earlier in the month and make sure that some action is taken. Maybe they do not have the right promotions or the right display, etc. And then an action can be driven out of this data, and we could make that number improve. And that's a very, very clear path that one could take. So, depending on what the product basically is intending to solve, this is how I would we do measure things.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to index, I think, more on that early side, particularly what actions you're taking. Because, revenue is so far at the end of the value proposition. It's the last thing that really happens. What are the key insights earlier in the funnel that I can start measuring? Like who's looking at this? What actions are they taking because of this data? I think those are really important. I still haven't figured out exactly how to measure actions taken. I don't know if you have, but it's hard because there's not really good instrumentation for me to know, oh yeah, they took this, this data and they did X, Y, and Z because of it. That's not really easy to measure. And so
in certain cases, I think we did, develop certain, flow where there would be a report which would say that, these are the exceptions that's happening, and that would go to your, let's say, your regional managers and your national manager, which means that it's making visible, let's say, the exceptions to your line manager plus one and both. And it keeps on coming until that exception is resolved, which means that there is a pressure for you to take an action. And the moment the report is stopped, which means that somebody has action on that. So, it's not the best way to do it, but there is some kind of visibility that we've tried to create, and and also for the managers to have that kind of opportunity to say that, okay, this something is wrong. Let's maybe look at it and go back. We've also put certain scores where they could go at dashboards and say that, my indexes are not moving or my NPS is not good, and help them to take action. So if you have a consistently low NPS score or a low KPI on every day, and even on the 10th of the month or 15th of the month doesn't improve, which means either the action has not been taken or not good enough action being taken to mitigate that. So they could formulate something, whether it's a long-term, short-term, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's really, really valuable advice. And so I think as we wrap up, this is the question that I absolutely love asking everyone. We've all made mistakes, every single one of us, and some of them are big, and then we really learn a valuable lesson from it. I'm curious if you could share for the audience, what's a big mistake and the lesson you've taken from it and moved forward in your career with?
So one of the biggest things that I've learned is that never take things for granted when you're dealing with data, right? Because but when we get our initiative or our data product requirement, we assume that the source is going to fulfill your needs. We assume that the quality is going to be there. We commit to timelines and we say that, okay, we're going to, as if everything is going to be rosy, nothing's going to break. And again, I'm not talking from the point of data engineering or anything of that sort. Just the basic data quality is so poor right now. It's very, very important to make sure that, the business is made aware and we understand that whether this is even possible to do or not, because if you're doing a feature engineering or a machine learning, you might not have all the attributions available at all in certain cases, and the business might not be aware of it. And it may be possible that somebody has sold a, beautiful presentation to the leadership and said that, if you do this is how it's going to look, but that are we able to do that? Nobody has assessed it, because we think when we say, yes, we have the data, we might have the data, but it might not be complete. And I think I've learned it the hard way. We've seen that, and we had to push up timelines. We had to work really hard. Also, let's say, prioritize our arrangements in terms of departments, etc., to make sure that, it is mitigated at the end of the day. But we had to go to, let's say, different geography and do it, which was better in shape.
Yeah.
No, that's my take on it.
I've made that same mistake. Like, oh, of course we've got the data. Of course it's going to be great. And then suddenly I'm like, we have the data, but it ain't great. What I've learned now is to really put in checkpoints to say, okay, we know we have data, but we need to assess the quality. We're going to assess it by X date and then determine whether the rest of these dates are supposed to be. And I'm really upfront. I probably am overly transparent with leadership. And I think that's probably what we all need to be, rather than just trying to fix it. No, we've got a problem. It's going to take X weeks to fix it. This is going to get pushed out. You can either continue funding this push, or you can pivot and say that this isn't. Because the other thing I think is really valuable is having agreements with all the business teams of saying, how good of data quality do you need in order to push this? Everyone would say they want 100% data quality. It's not feasible and it's not real. Hey, and so I think one of the things I've really realized is 80% data quality good enough for us to deploy and then fix other issues in the back end? Always worrisome to deploy even with 20% off, because once you push something into production, a lot of people forget about it, and that just becomes the de facto thing you're moving. So it's a tricky piece, but having those agreements in place, I think, and being very transparent is really valuable. And then to your point,
that is where we have data contract.
Yeah.
That is where kind of put there as to, what is the data quality expectation that you have.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Well, Chandan, I want to thank you so much for being a guest today. It has been a delight chatting with you both prior to today as well as during this conversation. If folks want to connect with you, I'm assuming that we can include your LinkedIn and everything else. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
And it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
It was lovely.
Thanks so much for listening. Hopefully you got some great actionable insights out of this episode. We're so excited to dig deeper into data product management and its many facets. If you want to engage more with the show, you can follow us on LinkedIn and check out Soda's website at soda.io for more related content around product management in data. And if you are a practitioner bringing product management practices to data and want to potentially be a guest, please check the show notes for a link to apply. As always, we strongly encourage people from underrepresented groups in tech to apply. Much as I'm a handsome devil, we don't want all our guests only looking like me. So again, let's get excited for more digging into data product management in action.